And so if the system is a little bit faulty in one way or the other, that chemical might end up leaking out of the fridge. And because it's technically odorless, that is to say, you can't smell it, you end up breathing in that gas and dying. And as a result, before people knew it, 15 people had died. And so a company called DuPont decided to really come up with a solution, to come up with a better refrigerant, better than methyl chloride, because you can't have something that if something happens and it leaks, it's killing people. So they decided to come up with a better refrigerant, and they put in charge a chemist called Plunkett, J. Plunkett. And he was tasked with the idea of coming up with a better refrigerant. One of those fine days, Plunkett is working with a gas called tetrafluoroethylene, TFE. Forget the big words. We are going to get somewhere. And as he was working with this gas, he puts the gas in a cylinder, and in the morning when he's coming to work on that gas, he realizes that when he's opening the valve, the gas is not coming out. But he lifts the cylinder, and it's as the same weight as if it's still full. So something must have happened. So he takes a saw and he cuts through the cylinder, and he realized that there's no gas, but there's a white solid in there. And he realizes that the gas he was working on, maybe for some reason, maybe because of the pressure in the gas, the gas polymerized, and it came from a gas to solid. It became what we call tetrafluoroethylene, which polytetrafluoroethylene, which we now normally know as PTFE, but the commercial name of that chemical is Teflon. And so he is not happy, but he realizes, let me just do 1 or 2 tests on this chemical before I discard it. And so he takes water, he pours on it, it doesn't hold. Akaeka kwa acid, it didn't work. He used even the strongest of base, but it couldn't dissolve this solid. And he really didn't know what to do with it, because it seems that it couldn't react with anything. But remember, it's 1929, 1930s thereof. And so the war machine of America is working on the atomic bomb project. And because DuPont, the same company, is still working with the military, they are trying to enrich uranium that is used in atomic bombs. And in the process of enriching uranium, you first change the uranium into a gas, which is called uranium hexafluoride. But the issue is that gas is very, very corrosive. And so, as the military are trying to work and to see how to work with this gas, which is corroding everything, DuPont tells them, hey, at our company, we have a chemical that seems not to corrode anything. It doesn't react, it's so inert. And so they call for the chemical, it comes, and then they actually realize that it's true. That chemical doesn't react with anything, not even uranium hexafluoride. And so they use that chemical, and they seal all their pipes with it, They are working on the atomic bomb. That is 1920s, 1930s. Soon thereafter, the war is over, and this chemical is still there. And now the military lifts the ban. When in the military there are things that you're not supposed to go and say, they are classified. But after the war, they declassify this chemical, and it's out there. And DuPont decides to commercialize it. But there was one issue with production, trying to produce that um, substance, which we now call Teflon. It was that when you try to polymerize it, when you try to make it from the gaseous state into the solid state, which is inertia, which can't react with anything, it sometimes the reaction becomes so hot that it causes explosions. And so they had to figure out a way, a mechanism in which they are going to polymerize this thing and turn it into solid, but it's not going to cause an explosion. And they found a chemical called perfluorooctanoic acid, or C8, which when you add it to that chemical, as it becomes solid, it doesn't cause explosions. And as a result of that, we ended up having Teflon. The chemical we know today, it's very inert. We use it everywhere. It's literally everywhere. We use it on our... Chances are your mobile phones have that chemical. Your pans at home have Teflon, the non-stick ones. And it's very ubiquitous. The issue is, as they were trying to polymerize it, the chemical that they were adding, the perfluorooctanoic acid they were adding, is not as good of a chemical. It's not a very good chemical. And the scientists working in DuPont actually realized that it wasn't good, that it had health effects. They tried to give it to rats, and they realized that it was causing liver cancer and testicular cancer. And it was worrying. They gave it to monkeys, and they were dying. But they didn't tell anybody this, because at this very moment in time, this chemical, Teflon, is making a lot of cash for the company. A lot of money. In fact, by the 1990s, when most of us here were being born, the youth, DuPont was raking in billions of dollars in sales from that. The issue is, in as much as Teflon is very inert and doesn't react with anything, the process of producing it en masse, the process of producing it in bulk, involves chemicals that do not decompose in nature. They stay with that for the longest time, and they are harmful. Yeah? But they didn't tell anybody this, because it was making them good money. And so the scientists tried to come up with scales. They said, if you uptake as much as this of this chemical called C8, you are okay. If you take this is the much that is harmful to your health. And they hid this truth for the longest time, until one day a farmer in another state realized that his cows were dying after taking some water from a nearby pond, a river. And he realized that the cows were actually foaming on the mouth after taking the water. And he realized that the water they were taking was coming from one of those drainage pipes from the company, like 6 miles away from where he stays. And he sued the company, and the company paid some undisclosed amount. And when this news reached the entire population, the company called DuPont was made to actually change the chemical they were using to produce Teflon. And they decided to use another chemical, which they now called C6. The issue is, that chemical is still as potent as the other one. Those chemicals I'm referring to are the ones that we now call forever chemicals. They are chemicals that they have been found everywhere, even in very remote locations like Antarctica. Even polar bears have those forever chemicals in their blood. And it's harmful. Like I've said, it causes cancer. It is not a good thing. And the engineers and the scientists in that company knew it, but they could not disclose it because of the love of money, because they were making a kill out of it. Those chemicals are with us today. They are everywhere. In fact, they say that if you take blood samples, 100% of those blood samples, regardless of how many people you've tested, they come back positive for the forever chemicals. They stay in our bodies for the longest time. And if you ingest so much of them, it causes complications and diseases. Praise Jesus. I don't know whether I've lost you, but I'm going somewhere with this. If I had a lot of time, we could have talked about the leaded premium. You guys know that when you go to petrol stations, you know, there was, I found in petrol stations there was something called unleaded premium, because I think there before there used to be petrol that was leaded. That is to say, it had lead in it. They started adding lead to gasoline as an anti-knocking agent. Those of us who remember our high school chemistry, you remember a chemical called tetraethyl lead. And we say that lead is used as an anti-knocking agent. The scientist who came up with this so-called solution against, you know how engines knock. An engine knocks when, or an engine starts to knock when, in the pistons, when the fuel in the pistons, when the fuel in the engine starts combusting before its time. So let's say when you compress the fuel, when the pistons in your engine compress the fuel, it is supposed to start combusting when the spark plug ignites, all right? But if it combusts before that, the engine starts to knock because it's usually very noisy. And they were trying to come up with this solution for that. And a scientist called Thomas Midgley was working with various compounds, and he found that lead, if you add lead to gasoline, it actually works well. It ensures that the fuel will not combust before its time, and the engine won't knock. The issue is, if you add lead to gasoline and you burn that, praise Jesus, when those fumes come out, they are usually very harmful for the environment and for anyone who is going to breathe them. And for the longest time, people used leaded premium, leaded gas, until people actually came to realize how bad it was for the health, for the mental health, for the growth of our children. And people realized that lead is actually not any good at all. No amount of lead is good for our health. And in the late 1990s, 1989, or 1990, I think it's 1996, it was banned. Nowadays, you cannot find gas or petrol or diesel that has lead in it. The thing is, whoever did that knew for sure how bad lead was. In fact, while working to create the solution, he fell sick. But when he came out to speak in a conference, he found that it wasn't as bad as people thought it was. And he took a lungful of the gas to show people that this thing is not bad. When he had actually come from recovering from lead poisoning as a result of working to create the solution. The thing is, he acted like that because the solution that he created was making money for the company or for the gas industry. And so he said that it is not harmful. I could go on and on, but we don't have time. I could talk of, for example, in 2009, in this nation of ours, a ship docked at our Mombasa port. It was carrying maize. And when our Kenya Bureau of Statistics tested the maize, they found that that maize was contaminated. It had too much of the chemical called aflatoxin. It wasn't fit for human consumption. And so it was not allowed to offload. And so it went. But some unscrupulous officials in that sector allowed the ship to go until we couldn't see it. And then it came back after the noise settled, and that maize was offloaded, and it was sold to the general public. And at one point, the MD of the Kenya Bureau of Statistics that time, I think it was called Dr. Mangeli Kioko, I think so. He said that if we eat this maize, in the next 10 years, the levels of cancer incidences that we are going to rock this country will be unprecedented. The truth is, we ate that maize. And whatever Kioko said, in some way, it has come to pass. All these things I'm telling you are things that can be backed up by evidence. You can Google them, and there has been research. In fact, what I've just quoted right now, it was a mini documentary that was done by, I think, KTN. Dennis Okari is in KTN or NTV. And it's called White Alert. You can find it on YouTube. I could go on and talk about how our supermarkets, sometimes they contaminate our meat to ensure longevity of the shelf life, so that it doesn't go bad, and so that they get profits. They do this with total disregard of who is going to eat that meat at the end. Go on and on and on, and talk about even the first time we made plastics as human beings. And one of those papers was actually saying that, people are saying now our manufacturing is not limited to what nature provides. We can go over and beyond. But a few decades down the line, we are here burning plastics. I could go on and talk about how sometimes we act as people with total disregard of what the Lord says of us. For example, if you go out here and even in our campuses, you find men who take our little girls and do whatever they do with them. And then because they want to hide whatever they have done, they will tell our young girls to take contraceptives. Some which even the doctors cannot prescribe. They don't have love at all. They don't care about the life of that young girl many, many years later to come. And they give them these terrible medications, which research has shown even as early as 5 years ago that depending on the longevity of how long you've taken these drugs, these things can increase cancer rate up to 38%. I could go on and on, but we don't have time. I just want to show us the many times that man has acted out of love. Not out of love, but without love. When man has taken actions that are devoid of love. The Bible has said that truly these only are found that God made man upright, but they have sought many schemes. The Lord made man upright. The Lord made man upright. But we have come out with terrible things. Perhaps in our invention and in creativity, being creative is not wrong. But the Lord allows us, even in our creativity, to sometimes see that which can be harmful. But sometimes as men, when the love of money and the love of the things of the world outpursues the love of God, men sometimes tend to act or take actions that are devoid of love. And every single time that man has taken actions that are without love, it's been disaster. Whether it is the incidents of DuPont that I've told you about, the forever chemicals that are now in our bodies causing different ailments, whether it is the lead that was put in our gasoline that was later burned, whether it is the chemicals that are in our foods today, whether it is the drugs, the chemicals, the agrochemicals that are being used on our shambas today to produce maize and our staples. Some of those chemicals that are being used as herbicides, they have been banned in other countries. But through, I don't know, they find some ways to enter Kenya. And in as much as they are banned, they are sold in some of our agrovets and they end up in our shambas. And we use them to cultivate our crops. Those crops end up on our plates and we eat that. The reason I was remembering is, as I was remembering to share today, was that on Tuesday morning, I was scouring through YouTube and I found a video of a doctor, a neurosurgeon, and he was doing, he was trying to remove a tumor from the brain. And so he had to shave the brain and drill through the scalp, cut it open, cut open the covering of the brain, and then go inside there and take out the tumor. And I was realizing, maybe, just maybe as human beings, we were never meant to go through that. Maybe. There is a good chance, and I do believe it's a good chance, that we were never ever meant to ever go through that pain. But man, over the years, man has taken actions. Some might call it creativity, but man has taken actions. And whereas we've come to a point of realizing what is true, what is wrong, and even in our inventions and in creativity, we've come to realize this can be harmful. We have turned a blind eye. We've acted out of love. We have acted without love. We have taken actions that are devoid of love. And as a result, it's been pain after pain after pain after pain. We have sought out many schemes. Every single time people act without love, whether it's because they want to enrich themselves, whether it's because it favors them, many, many years later, it causes ripple actions that tear through humanity like a hot knife through butter, causing ailments, diseases that I genuinely don't think we were ever meant to suffer from. And it makes you actually realize how great of a commandment love is. How great of a commandment love is. You know, when they asked Jesus in the New Testament, what is the greatest commandment? Personally, I was perhaps expecting, because these commandments were all given by the Lord, maybe the Lord would say, these commandments are, they're all equal and, you can't keep one and break the other. But the Lord was very succinct, very categorical, and he went direct to the point and he said, love the Lord your God. For love is the greatest commandment. And every single time you find yourself acting without love, trust you me, you are causing problems. You might not realize them now, but you're causing problems that will tear through maybe your generation or the people you're going to interact with, whether it's that moment in time or later on. And so today, even as we discuss going back to the first love, perhaps I just want to light some light on how far we have fallen. Even as we come to the reality of we've fallen from this love, I just want maybe to show us how much we've actually fallen from it and the journey that we might actually need to take to come back to this love. Man has sought out many schemes that are ravaging through our societies today in a way that is very painful. The things we are suffering from today, they are very, very painful. Because a man somewhere acted without love. Acted without love. They saw a warning. They saw that this could be wrong, but they disregarded it because maybe for selfish reasons it was profiting them. We have sicknesses today that has been caused purely by the lack of love. That if some of these people actually had even a little bit of love in them, if they just considered just a little bit, then society wouldn't be where we are right now. And the pains and the budgets that we are allocating towards were fighting some of the ailments that man goes through. Perhaps you wouldn't need to do that. Every time man acts without love, every time we take actions that are devoid of love, we hurt ourselves deeply. 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 And I was thinking about this. And I was reading the book of Ezekiel. I was seeing that the Lord was saying that it pains him when people kill. It pains him when people do these disgusting things. And I took a pause kidogo and I was trying to analyze why is God interested? I mean, God is in heaven. Why does it bother him that whether someone dies here or not? Why is that important to him? I mean, you're God. After all, people will still die though. Why does it bother him so much? And I realized part of the reason maybe I would say is God usually has purpose and plans for every human being that he creates, And God being love himself, he has these plans that are, should I say, perfect. But every time a person takes an action that is against that, because it is not with love, it goes very much against the plan that God has for his people. And as a result, we maybe end up having pains that later on we'll come and call to our Father and say, this is painful. This is painful. This is painful. And yet, maybe in the plan that the Lord had for our lives from the time we were born to the time we would exit the earth, maybe that wasn't part of the plan. Maybe that wasn't part of the pain that we were supposed to go through. When the Lord was telling the Israelites that you shan't suffer the diseases that the Egyptians suffered, I think there was a caveat there that maybe the Israelites weren't actually realizing. That the Lord was actually telling them that because you shan't behave like the Egyptians, for sure you won't even fall sick as them. It's interesting to see how, the other day we were taught about how the Lord said you shan't eat some things, blood, human fat. But do you even realize that the things that the Lord was actually telling us not to consume, they were actually very organic. They were very organic. Nowadays, we are battling chemicals that are man-made, that take a long time in the environment. Some, they never actually decompose. You'll stay with them. In fact, they were saying about that chemical that I've said it's called C8 or C6. It has 6 carbon atoms. That's why it's called C6 or C8. That chemical, it looks like your fatty acids in the body. And so chances are, if you have that chemical in your body, it can cruise through your veins and your blood and can go wherever in your body. And because it looks like those fatty acids, when it goes to the places where those fatty acids should be, it changes the way your anatomy should work. And we end up battling things that I genuinely believe we were never meant, ever. We were never meant to battle those things. We were never meant to come across those pains. It was not the idea of God while creating us for us to go through those pains. Those pains are man-made. those pains have been caused by men who acted without love. Without love. Without love. And I want to be emphatic here. I don't know how many of us here maybe are farmers. It becomes very hard to produce food for a city like Nairobi, which is, I think, close to 5 million people now. I was watching something and they were saying when this city was actually made, when the city began, the plans to have water supply was meant to cover for, I think, 970 people. But we've stretched that to now the water supply has to be made for now 5 million people. And that stretch has not been in terms of water alone. We have stretched that also when it comes to food supply. It becomes very hard for us to produce organically food for 5 million people in one city, and that's where we do you know how much chicken we need in one day in Kenya? Not in Kenya, in Nairobi. It becomes very hard to produce those chickens organically. Yeah. That's why we end up having the broiler chickens. But I want to tell us Christians, some of the ways that those things are being produced, people are producing them as if they are going to feed animals, and you end up having so much of a residue in them. Not because people don't know that those residues are bad for our health, but because in the pursuit of the riches of the world, we sometimes act without love. Without love at all. You don't care who the person is going to eat that. And those things enter the ecosystem and they enter our bodies. And we end up battling things that the Lord never ever meant for us to battle. Because the Lord made man upright. The Lord made man upright. When I was in campus, in one of those occasions when we were in church, we were split into groups, They said, these students, nani anataka kufanya entrepreneurship, waende your side, business, IT, and I landed in the side of economics. And the guy who was talking that day was a guy I don't remember his name now. And he told us that he does a business, he exports minji. No, not minji. Those French beans. Yes, French beans. He exports French beans to as far as United Kingdom. And he was telling us that those French beans, before they export them, someone from the countries they are taking them comes and tests them to see how much of residue, the pesticide residue they have. And there's a threshold. If it goes beyond there, they will not allow you to export those French beans. Because they have so much residue, it is not healthy for their citizens in those Western countries. But I want to ask you today, when they refuse for those French beans to be exported, yeah? Where do those things end up? Do you think they throw them away? Do you think they throw them away? Because sometimes man acts without love, with total disregard to who is going to eat this. Who is going to eat this? God made man upright. But man has sought out many, many schemes. Praise Jesus. And so today, even as we talk about going back to the first love, I just want us to see how much we've fallen as a people. So that as we start to make the journey to go back to the first love, at least you know how much of trekking you might need to do. At least you might recognize how much as a society we've really gone down. how much of a mess we've created because we were selfish. We lacked love. And I would love to implore us, in whatever business you do, and more so if you're in agriculture, you're producing food for people, act with love. Act with love. Act with love.